from Canada and speaks English, I will switch over to English as well in my introduction. Within design and interaction design, there's an expression called micro-interaction that's widely used. Micro-interactions is basically changing your alarm, liking a post on Facebook, all the small things that you do in a digital interface is a micro-interaction. But our keynote speaker today, who is the design lead at Twitter, prefers to talk about the larger questions. He prefers to talk about macro interactions and how we can make design matter and be a more integrated part of companies and product development, basically. And so, a warm welcome up on stage, Mike Kruzeniski.
Thank you.
I will leave the stage
right
away.
Out.
But something that I have to introduce to the audience is the fact that we wanted to add a personal touch to everything that we do today. So all speakers have been asked to submit a personal picture, a sort of almost real-time selfie. So here's yours. Take it away.
Thank you. Good morning. So the picture's gone, but so it was. I wanted to get kind of a sexy pose for the selfie. Upside down in bed, but no. The two most important people in my life are my two daughters, Ella, and my 2-month-old baby Ruby. And last night I was in the hotel and I was talking to Ella on the phone, and she was like, "Daddy, where's the people?" Because I said I'm traveling. This is the first time I've left town since our new daughter was born. And she said, "Where's all the people?" I'm like, "Well, they're not here." She said, "Well, I don't understand. Where's the people?" So I need all of you. I need to take just a quick video because she didn't understand why you weren't in my hotel room last night. But it's a nice room. It wasn't really big enough for all of you. But all right, just quickly, I'm gonna take a video, and just all of you can say, you can say Shina, or Hisan. Ella B is her name. So, hi Ella, here's all the people. All right.
Hey.
Thank you very much. So yeah, Shana is basically what's left of my Swedish. I spent a couple years in Umeå. This is I guess over 10 years ago now, and really had a wonderful time. It's really nice to be back in Sweden. It's been far too long, and unfortunately, because of these two little girls, it's a very, very short trip. We need to get back to see them. But thank you for having me here today. We can move on to the next slide. So this talk is called Macro Interactions, and like Paulina said, there's another term, micro interactions, and it sort of refers to, the sort of tiny details in interaction design that make products so wonderful. And just quickly, who in the room would consider themselves to be a designer? Just a couple, okay. Who works with designers on a day-to-day basis? All right, that's good. I mean, the nice thing about speaking in Sweden, I think generally, if you're all familiar with design, that's not necessarily always the case in other countries. But so I will be talking about a lot about design, but I will sort of try to connect it to, I think, a lot of the broader sort of conversation around web and marketing and so on. If you want to chat with me about this, either now or afterwards, you can find me on Twitter at mcruz. Like Paulina said, I run one of the design teams at Twitter, and I also write sometimes at Medium. This talk kind of goes back some years ago, or kind of like had its beginnings from a couple, or I don't know, it's a while ago now. It's probably 5-6 years ago. But I was working on a product called Windows Phone at the time, and I was having coffee with my boss, Albert Stamm. He heads design for, or my former boss, he heads design for Windows and Xbox and Windows Phone and so on. And we were getting close to the launch of Windows Phone, the initial launch in Barcelona. It was 2010, I guess it would have been, and we were just kind of chatting about things, projects that were going on in the studio, and things that we were sort of looking at working on next. And at some point, he kind of just said, "Hey, we're going to need apps." And he was referring to the phone in particular. We were about to launch, and it's like, we're going to need some apps for the phone. And my response was like, "Yep, yeah, we totally are." And then his response to that was, we should do something about that. And my really insightful response to that was something along the lines of, what? Because in my mind at that time, we had spent years, we spent, like really long days and nights kind of working on the product that we were going to be shipping. And in my mind, we were done. We had done the product. And then at that point in time, like it's, it goes out to the world, developers make apps and, people buy the phone and we kind of move on to the next thing. And I think that sort of stemmed from the way I thought about, my discipline, my sort of specialty in product design, and the way I would focus my time is make the thing. It goes out into the world. We sort of do the research to figure out the right thing to build. We build it, gets made, and then some other team markets it and goes and builds it and puts it out there. In a sense, my focus was, because of my specialty, like building that, the best thing I could possibly make based on the, my understanding of the problem and then the tools that I have available to me. And that was kind of the way I looked at design. And so building something like apps or getting involved in apps was, didn't connect for me of why we would spend time working on that. But, obviously, as you probably all know, if you have an iPhone or an Android or a Windows phone in your pocket, like the product itself isn't really complete without all those apps that tell the bigger story around the product. And obviously for, new products coming into the market, having apps is a really big part of it. And we all know that now. I think that was like something that was still sort of emerging over time, and actually it goes beyond apps. Like if you go to any electronics store, you find all kinds of accessories, speakers, different kinds of cables and selfie sticks and armbands and so on and so on. A whole kind of wide array of accessories that you can connect to your phone. And this is part of the broader ecosystem of the product. And in some sense, if you were to put a product out in the world that doesn't have this ecosystem today, you're dead in the water. There's nowhere to really go for you because all your competitors have this ecosystem that's built around them. So over time, and sort of thinking about that problem and saying, okay, no, well, actually, the product isn't complete until we have those apps. We need to think about that in terms of, part of the design. Started to change the way I think about design more broadly. Going from, if I want to make a product great, I can't just be focused on the product itself. I have to start to think about all the sort of intangibles and tangibles around the product and what's the story that we have around that, and actually spend some design time focused on that larger story. In design, there's a lot of talk around quality and craftsmanship, and the devil's in the details and getting those details really, really right. And this is something designers really, really love to do. But the thing is that if you spend all that time in those details and you're sort of missing that big picture, those details end up not going anywhere. I mean, you've spent time crafting this really beautiful, incredible product that has no way to get to customers or doesn't have the story around it that make it relevant to customers. And so that was the piece that as a designer I was trying to sort of change my mind. And that first conversation with Albert started to change my mind around. And what I'm trying to talk about with other designers is that care for the details is wonderful, but only once you sort of have that complete picture around the product that you're trying to build. Because the goal at the end of the day is to have something that is relevant for people, that people talk about, that they can connect to, that they can go buy. And they, can bring it into their lives. So this idea of macro interactions, well, breaking it down a little bit further. So a micro interaction you might think of as something as simple as a switch that you might have on iPhone or Android. The little tiny animation as it pops from one switch to the other. These are the little details that a lot of designers love to spend time on and make really, really wonderful. And they as you use a product that brings a product to life and is really nice. If you step up from there, there's the product itself and how it works and how all the interactions work. So this is just sort of classic interaction design. How do the applications? How does the software work? How do you sort of move through the product? And have a good experience of accomplishing particular tasks. You can go from there and you can say, okay, well, there's these apps. For example, there's the ecosystem of things that complete the product. So you first get this phone as an example, has 9 or 12 applications pre-installed on it. But to further enhance the experience, you go download Twitter, you go download Facebook, you go down in Pinterest, and so on and so on. You get some games, and that's the thing that really sort of completes the full experience of the product. And without that, it's a pretty kind of dumb object in some sense. After that, then you start to get into really big picture interactions. Like, okay, well, how does the product work with the other products that I might want to sell? How does it work with the accessories? How does it, tell a full story across multiple products? Apple obviously is really, really, really good at this, so it's always easy to use Apple products as these kinds of examples. Where they've gone now with continuity and handoff to be able to jump from your phone to your tablet to your laptop is incredible. Obviously, this extends now to cars and so on. But I like to push it even further, and just for my team to think about, like, how far out can we even go? How do we think about how we actually make the things we make? So, Apple, again, is really good talking about, like, the craftsmanship that they put in, but it's more than that. It's like, what is the part of what's made them so successful is they've really finessed the operations around how they manufacture the things that they make. And then after that, how does it actually get to the customers that they're trying to reach? So what's the in-store experience? The fact that they even have stores. When you go to the store, the marketing experience inside there, the way the Genius bar works, the way that the customer service works. I mean, they're fantastic at this. And if you've been in an Apple store, you know that. And that, to me, is the sort of like full spectrum of product experience. So while you may have some designers on your team and they're focused on, like, what is, the beautiful little switches and toggles that you have in your product, actually, I like to get my team thinking about what are the interactive experiences that go all the way from those little details to the very earliest touch points that someone might have with the product. So again, you imagine this sort of spectrum. To me, a macro interaction is essentially anything that allows or might connect someone to the product that you're trying to build. And when you ignore that stuff, that's where you start to have these barriers to your product. And that's the stuff that I've started to spend time focusing on and trying to observe. Where are the places that things break down? Where are the places that actually, like, people can't even get to the product that we're trying to create? So there's three of them that I actually kind of like refer to regularly, and I'm trying to kind of think through other kind of patterns for to allow my team to focus on as we build stuff. But one of the first ones is, like, relates to what I was talking about before, is just the idea of network defects. So again, I mentioned that you have a product and you have these things around it. These are the things that complete the picture of the product. In a phone, obviously, not everybody's working on phones, but for phones, it's apps and accessories and that sort of thing. I like to think it more broadly as just the ecosystem around the product, because that could be any number of things depending on what you work on. That might be, not physical accessories and apps, but some other kind of partner experiences that are around your product. So for us at Microsoft, as we were trying to build out this ecosystem experience, we needed to figure out how we were going to actually connect with developers, because there was no guarantee that when you put a new phone out in the world that anybody was actually going to build anything for it. And Microsoft at the time, like a lot of developers, had moved over to iOS and were focused on iOS and Android, and were building applications for those phones, and they were perfectly happy doing that. And so, especially as you're reaching out to developers who are not necessarily used to developing for Microsoft, you're having to break down some impressions they have of Microsoft and try to convince them that they should be spending time on our product. So for us, like I said, I went from thinking like, well, why is this something that we would spend time on? Don't we have a developer team or something like that? To the product team that was working on the product itself spent time thinking about, hey, what are the materials? What are the things that would help get developers interested in Windows Phone? And so we actually treated that as a kind of design exercise in itself. In the same way that we research and understand the problem, explore different approaches to the problem, and design approaches to solving it, which is a basic design process. We tried to apply that to this sort of more intangible problem of how do you get people building something for a product that they're not necessarily jumping to build for. So we built a lot of material around the design principles of the product. We tried to help create communication channels for people who are trying to get, that were becoming interested in it. We were trying to create a really exciting communication and marketing around why it's interesting to develop for our product, and show the sort of unique aspects of the design language, which was a really big thing for us, that would interest developers. We spent a lot of time going to different conferences and presenting the topic of why they might want to build for it. And so that became an exercise in itself. Which conferences should we be at? What kind of stories do we want to tell? And so that was actually for, a year after launching, like a number of us directly from the design team. It wasn't like, necessarily an evangelist or someone sort of removed from the product. We sent the designers who worked on the product out to developer conferences and get them to talk about, what was important to them and why, and try to like make that connection with the developer community. And so, there's just some examples of that. We created a lot of workshops and different kinds of educational courses that we would bring people into. And so this was, again, we went from a team focused on designing the product itself to designing experiences around the product that would help bring developers into the family. We developed different kinds of design conferences and developer conferences, and that was, again, like a massive cross-discipline effort. So it wasn't just something that we left off to the marketing team, it was something that we actually focused on ourselves. So I tried to pull out some other examples of where I think this kind of big picture thinking works really well. So if you think of a product like Reddit, and if you look at Reddit, most designers would look at Reddit, and everybody familiar with Reddit? Who doesn't know about Reddit? Everybody knows about Reddit. Great. So if you look at this this screenshot, it's not the most beautiful website in the world, and it's not going to win any design awards. It's kind of a very messy place. But people who use Reddit love Reddit, and it's something that sucks people in very, very deeply, and they spend hours and hours and hours on it. So as an experience, it's actually incredibly well done. And the thing that's interesting about Reddit is, all the content there comes from their community of Redditors. So it's all coming from basically volunteers who aren't paid. And the thing is that, this had to start from somewhere. So, those Redditors didn't exist in the beginning. So when you're creating a site that's completely sourced from people who you're asking to, like, give their volunteer time to create something, like, how do you get that started? Well, the founders actually spent the first months after launching the product creating their own fake accounts. So they made their own names and own fake profiles, and basically just started flooding the site with their own content and commenting to each other. And so it was like 2 or 3 guys basically like pretending to be dozens and dozens, hundreds of people, and just like kind of simulating a community. And over time, people come to it and go, oh wow, there's a really vibrant community here. And in fact, it was just like a couple of guys. But over time, that sort of took off. And it was a really sort of smart approach to figuring out, like, okay, we've got this thing we think is really cool, but how do you actually get people to engage with it? And so they thought about that as a kind of problem in itself to solve. Pinterest, similarly, I mean, we all kind of know Pinterest as a fairly large site now, but when they got started, actually, they really had a hard time getting off the ground. So about 3 months after they had launched, they were only at about 3,000 active users, which, in the world of social networks is pretty tiny. And, in San Francisco or in the startup world, I think if you were having that kind of success on another product, you'd start to be thinking about pivoting and trying something else. They were pretty confident about the product that they had. And, among the 3,000 people that they did have using it, they knew that there was a lot of people who really loved it. And so what they did, instead of kind of abandoning it and saying, okay, this doesn't work, is they spent extra time trying to get to know those 3,000 people, or a subset of those 3,000 people, more personally, trying to understand, okay, what is it about it that you guys love so much that we can't seem to connect with the rest of the world. So in connecting with those first users, they got some clarity around which parts of the product were working extremely well and who the people were, and then they sort of used that to then go connect with more people like that. So there was a lot of women using it, a lot of decorators, mothers who were sort of collecting material for curating objects for the home. And so what they started to do was advertise on mom blogs, as an example, and they built in tools that would allow bloggers who were using Pinterest to sort of more seamlessly integrate the Pinterest content with their site, sort of, which created, like, sort of dug into that community and sort of built around that community. And of course, years later, there dozens of millions of users. And that came from focusing specifically on, okay, how do we go from this very specific community who loves the product, think about some tools and interactions that we can have to grow that audience out. Medium, Medium is a beautiful site, really, really well done. As a designer, love this site. But the thing I think that's smartest about Medium itself is when they launched, it was closed off, and they essentially focused on finding who were the kinds of writers they would want for to have on Medium. So it was closed, but had this sense of there was people that you knew. They'd kind of like plucked people out of different kinds of communities and connected them with the site and got them writing. They paid some people. They brought some writers in-house. And so for a period of a year, you had this experience of it being like very familiar because you knew some of the people that were writing on it. But it allowed them to focus on getting that content right. And then, of course, a year later, they opened it up, and then it became a product that anybody could use. But what they had done is sort of established the tone of voice, created expectations around the kinds of content, if you're going to write for Medium, that you should put on there. And then that sort of allowed the community to grow really quickly after that, because they had a clear sense of like what this product is supposed to be. Finally, Snapchat, again, sort of like Reddit, a product that I think most designers love to complain about because it's kind of a hot mess. The UI is, I don't know, does anybody use Snapchat here? A couple of people. So if you don't use Snapchat, it's a very confusing UI. It does everything wrong. If you're sort of from the traditional school of like, here's how interaction design should work, and here's the patterns that you should use to make a successful product, they just kind of ignore all of that. But I think what they've managed to do is connect with an audience that actually appreciates that, who's looking for something that their parents aren't using, and so those interactions actually really appeal to someone that's looking for something that not everybody's going to understand right away. On top of that, they've done a really good job of connecting with the kinds of events and experiences that the audience they're going after really care about. So they go in, they focus on things like Coachella, or spring break in Daytona Beach and that sort of thing. And then they create experiences specifically to that. So they've created a kind of experience that isn't the sort of doesn't get the usual micro interactions right, but they get the macro interactions, the big picture experience around the product right on. Another piece that I started to see as I was working at Microsoft and then now at Twitter as well is just this idea of the barriers to entry. So I think a lot of people build products with this sense of like, we're going to build it and people are just going to come because we're going to build this awesome thing and they're just going to show up and they're going to start using it because everybody knows it's awesome. So again, that was sort of the way naively I tended to think about things. Like, the focus is you make something so good that it's just undeniably great and people are just going to use it. But obviously there's a lot of ways that people need to get connected with your product before they can ever use it and get to know about it. I think we're good. All right. So as an example, when you put a phone out in a store, and I haven't been into a mobile operator in Sweden in a long time, but in the States, the way it works is if you go into an operator store, the phones at the front are basically what they want you to buy. So as you walk in, there's a big display, and it's essentially like, buy this phone. In the middle of the store is phones that are probably kind of like being that like Samsung or somebody is trying to get you to buy, but isn't necessarily the phone that the store wants you to buy. And in the back is all the other stuff that it exists, but nobody's necessarily like you're probably not going to buy it. And if you really want a phone back there, it's because you specifically want that phone. And so I think everybody goes into a phone store and is like, I have this like phone in mind. I'm going to go buy this particular phone. And the operator stores can actually steer you very effectively to, no, you should actually buy this. And there's a bunch of stuff happening in the background. Companies have different kinds of partnerships in place. There's different kinds of subsidies. The people who are selling the phones may be getting some kind of benefits based on whatever the partnerships are. And so if you're in like our position that we were in, where we're trying to put out a new phone, you need to understand this, because if you just put it in the store and again, like sort of have this hope that like, oh, I guess people will just buy it, that's not the case at all. You need to sort of understand those relationships and understand like how those placements in the store affect that. And that was something we needed to spend a lot of time on and figure out like what was the strategy going to be for placement of those and connecting with the people who are actually going to sell the phone. Because in the end, it's some 20-year-old guy or woman who's basically responsible for getting that product over that last, hump down to the customer's hands. Now, on a different kind of product, like a digital product like apps or website, is very, very different. It's not, you're not dealing with a physical store, but you're still dealing with some kind of interface before people can actually get to your product. So if you're making an app, consider that at the end of the day, like that app's going to need to go through something like the Google Play Store or the Apple iOS Store, and where you're positioned in that store has a huge effect on whether people can ever get to your product or see your product. So again, like, can't just put it in the App Store and expect that people download it. Showing up on that front page is a huge, huge deal for app developers, and there's a lot of strategies that developers take to get to that placement, and then have to watch sort of as they fall off of that page and then into the top charts. What are the different strategies they're going to take on to sort of get themselves back up there. So that's the kind of, it's different than having a physical store where a 20-year-old is helping to sell your product, but you do have a similar sort of interface that is affecting how you're going to reach out to customers. Once people actually have your app, then you have another kind of barrier entry, which is, in a lot of cases, what is the experience of getting set up on that app? Do you have a sign-up process? I think a lot of times people who develop apps are like, they go build it and they're like, oh yeah, we'll have like some sort of sign-up at the beginning. But that sign-up experience is actually like a huge amount of friction for people to get to the product that you've made. So how seamless can you make that sign-in flow? Can you even remove that sign-in flow? So for example, this is something we have Twitter.com right now. If you don't have a Twitter account, you'll actually see this kind of thing right now where we connect you with different kinds of things that are on Twitter before you even sign up. So again, just trying to figure out like what are the ways that you can remove that friction so that people don't have to do a bunch of work to get to your product. Because it actually, if you look at a lot of products, it's surprising how much work is actually involved in getting to it, and people making it don't necessarily see that. So that's, again, another thing that we like to think about is, okay, you've made this thing, you're trying to get people to it, but a lot of times there's these barriers, and how do you identify those? So what we do is actually very regularly have designers start from the very beginning. So imagine that you don't use Twitter. How do you get to Twitter? What's the thing that you saw that landed you on the product? Now, okay, pretend you don't have an account. Sign up for Twitter from scratch. Would you make it all the way through? Like, at what points would you, consider just, this isn't worth it? So that's a thing that we do again and again and again. We don't just do it once and say, great, we've nailed it. We return to that regularly. On a monthly basis, weekly basis sometimes, to try to understand what are all the different gaps that are preventing people from getting to the product. And you can do that yourself. Like, what are the ways that you imagine someone getting to your product, and then where would they leave? And then you can identify those and spend time focusing on those interaction moments and improve those. Finally, people and process. So, at the end of the day, to make a product of some kind or a website of some kind takes people and some kind of processes for making that product. Well, this story in particular, so when I joined Twitter a few years ago, we were going through a bit of a tough time on the design team. This is normal. Every company, sort of different growth stages, has different kinds of struggles that it deals with, especially a company that's growing very rapidly. And so we went through a particular period where we just had a lot of frustration within the teams, breakdowns in communication, designers who weren't happy, people who were just like kind of, not hanging out in the studio, not working well together. That turned into people just sort of over time kind of leaving. We had a number of designers leave, and it's really hard to make a product that you're proud of when the people who are working on the product, aren't very excited to come into work every day, and especially when they, stop. When they just stop working. So that was something that we felt like, hey, if we're gonna do the kind of work that we want to do, we have to spend time focused on this. And that might not sound like a kind of interaction design problem, but we treated it like one, because we said we can't make a product that we love if we just focus on that and ignore the problems that are around us. So we actually, again, looked at how we improve the studio as a kind of process itself. Unhappy people don't make good products. A guy, Chris Abad, who's a designer in San Francisco, had put it in a sense, products are an outcome of people and their environment, which is the side I love. I think a lot of people sort of believe products are made by really extremely talented people. Yes, talent is an important part of it, but actually it has a lot to do with just the environment and the space that you create for people to work within. So, like I said, we sort of focus on how do we improve the environment that our team is working within as a kind of design problem. So one of the things that we found, like at that point in time, designers, a lot of people working on the product weren't really proud of the work that they were doing. So we actually tried to pull that out, and we started an event that we called Design Open House. So it was just within the studio. We had all the designers kind of pull out their work and put it on display and present it as something that, be proud of the work that you're doing, share it with each other. And so that became a moment for designers to see that actually like their colleagues were doing really cool work, the work that they were doing, they were really happy with. And then we extended that. We started to invite developers to it and other members of the company, and to show like, hey, the work that's happening within the studio is really, really good. And that got bigger and bigger over time. Obviously we had an unhappy team, so people knew that the designers were unhappy. That started to flip around, where we had this went from being a small studio kind of event to like something that we held in one of the biggest halls in the company, and we had lineups of people coming to check it out, and that really started to rebuild the trust and pride within the team. Then we started to think about like the processes itself that we used within the studio. So we didn't have enough moments where designers were mixing together. So we changed the format of how designers meet through the week, how we review work. So we start off every Monday morning with the whole team together and kind of celebrate the successes from the past week. So every Monday morning we talk about the things that were amazing that happened the week before. We talk about things that are coming up. And it sounds like small things, but it becomes this like constant celebration of the work that like you and your colleagues are doing. We started to invite speakers and have even people within the team talk about or give presentations about something that they were really excited about. It didn't even need to be related to design. And finally, we changed the way we review work. So, a lot of times in companies, you're looking at work and teams treat this as like, oh, we're responsible for this and we're going to review this. We opened that completely up. So if we were reviewing design work, we said anybody can come check it out. This is a totally open process, nothing to hide, and we want the conversation around design to be as big as possible so anybody can be involved. And so this was like a slow turning over of the spirit of the team. Of course, this translates into other things. You start to party together. You start to have fun team events together. And this stuff I think can easily be seen as like, oh, this is like the extra stuff. It's not really, really important. But actually, that bonding of the team is really important, because especially when you're making stuff like software or websites, the knowledge that is in the team itself is really, really crucial. And at least in places like San Francisco, you can get there's a lot of opportunities for people to jump to different things. And so you can get a lot of attrition. Our team's actually been, sticking together for a really long time. And that's really powerful, because we keep getting stronger and stronger as the team grows and gets to know each other better. But we did also a kind of counterintuitive thing, because of course still sometimes you lose people from the team. And so we thought together, like, how do we make that not a depressing moment? Because you're losing people that are sort of part of your family. How do we make that something to celebrate? So we created an event we call Leaving the Nest. So when someone leaves the team, we actually have a big event at the end of the week, where we pull out slides from, if we can get it, like all the way from their childhood. We talk about all the things that they did, while they were at Twitter. We celebrate all the things that, like their successes. We tell, fun stories and that sort of thing. And, people now often like bring their wives or husbands, boyfriends, girlfriends, etc. And it's a really fun moment. So it went from being like, oh, crap, we lost, so-and-so. It actually becomes like a thing like, hey, that was really great. Like, we love everything that you did for us. Stay in touch. And so we sort of look at that as not like someone left the company. We actually look at that as like they're alumni now. They still are part of that, the fabric of the team. And they if they know a friend who's looking for work, they'll send them to us and so on. And it just makes us stronger. And I like to think that people who are still with the team think about that day when they're going to leave. Like, hey, what are they going to talk about with me? And so it sort of pushes everybody to like continue to do really great work. And we also we created an artifact from it, something we call the Twitter wings. So when you leave, you get your Twitter like pilot wings. And we started to do this in a number of other things. Like we give all kinds of, we give out a ridiculous number of things, and sometimes it maybe seems a bit silly, but we keep like a constant sense of celebration and excitement about things that are going on in the studio. So over time, obviously we got back to work and focused on like the work itself. That's the important thing. We're not there just to, it's not a country club. We are intending to do work. But by reinvigorating the spirit of the team, and treating that as a problem we needed to solve was something that allowed us to get back to things. And of course, the team is very happy today. And we actually went from a point of like taking fixing that part of the team to exporting what we had built within the team. So now we actually have groups of designers. We spread them out through the company. And so we continue to take that culture and move it through to other pockets of the company. So the design team isn't just one little team. We actually sit out with every team within the company. And that's another way of just like continue pushing on the kinds of interactions that we like to see within working product teams around Twitter. I'll skip this and just in favor of time. So why macro interactions? There is this term micro interactions, and there's a lot of focus on like specifically what makes a micro interaction. And I'm not trying to like create like a new sort of course in macro interactions. But the reason I think it's important is, I think we spend a lot of time focused on the products that we're trying to make and understanding what is the right process for that. So research, explore, design, develop, refine, and ship. And there's this very specific product process that people working on products or websites focus on, and kind of ignore all the stuff that is happening around. And I look at those as actually opportunities to put design thinking into as well. So at any step of the process, there's like, hey, do we have the right people? Do we have the right skills on the team? Does the team have the resources they need? Now you might think of that, hey, that's an HR problem. And it's like, no. That's actually something you can spend time thinking about as a creative team, whether it's a design team or the team that you have. That's time to think about how you might solve that as a real problem and come up with something that's really powerful and pushes you to the next level. How do our products work well together? Does our product have the accessories that it needs? Again, that's a thing to spend time on as a design problem. And so that's something that I've been trying to instill in the team, that it's not just about the thing that you're trying to create itself, but all the things happening around it, and each of those is an opportunity to think about as an interactive experience. And that's it. I guess I'll leave you with a Finnish architect quote is essentially that captures this idea as, don't just think about the specific product that you're building, but think about how it fits in the bigger picture of the things around it. Thank you.
We have a couple of questions. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
So let's see if we have any questions. I have one,
sure.
Actually. So I've worked at a couple of tech companies in the past, and I've noticed that people are usually sort of afraid of the tech team and the developers because they're sort of, you have no idea what's going on in there, and they're a bit weird and asocial according to the stereotypes. But I've always been more afraid of designers, actually, because it just feels like there's so much sort of... they're so proud of their work, and it's so easy to sort of, as a non-designer, not to understand what's going on. And so, since most people here in the audience are not designers, but working with designers in different ways, do you have sort of like 1 or 2 or 3 recommendations for sort of how to handle designers, how to talk to designers? Like, are there any big mistakes that they should avoid?
Well, hopefully, I don't think we're that scary. Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of sort of what I've talked about, especially the people in process or some of the stuff, around creating open houses and stuff, was about sort of breaking that down from the design side, like acknowledging that I think there's people who are interested in design but don't get it, and so like trying to reach out. I think it's perfectly fair to go the other way. Just find out who the designers are that are in your company, that get to know them. I think the easiest thing is, most people, if you ask like, hey, what are you working on? Like, what are you doing these days? Most people like to talk about that, and I think that's an easy entry into trying to understand like what your team is doing. I've actually like created relationships with different, probably every company or every team within the company, and now it becomes a conversation of, hey, we're working on this thing. Could you or one or the other, a couple other designers come help us with it? And so, sometimes it's just all it takes is asking. And I think one of the mistakes that I think outside groups make is the only time that they reach out to the design team is like, hey, we need a logo for a t-shirt. And then they're like, okay, so we're like the logo group. And more often, I think designers like to sort of put this bigger picture process thinking, into play when thinking about a marketing strategy or thinking about like an HR strategy or a recruiting strategy. Like, we've spent time with the recruiting team to think about like, what is the way that we actually connect with people and make, Twitter exciting, and why should they come work with, us versus somewhere else? Like, again, you can spend time as a designer thinking about that as a problem. So I think just reaching out and saying, hey, we've got this thing, like, we thought that maybe someone from the design team might be interested in helping is a good way to start. Yeah.
All right. A quick question from Twitter.
but I'm so busy tweeting. So, but we have some questions. Your comments on Periscope. Someone is wondering.
Yeah, the theme is real time, and Twitter is very much about real time, and Periscope even more so.
Perhaps some design thoughts on the Periscope feature in Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, I love Periscope. It's a very, I think it continues to just break down walls around how, people can connect with others. I think Twitter's always been, for me, I think that's something I've always been fascinated with Twitter is the conversations I get to have with people around the world that I might not otherwise. And Periscope kind of takes that to a whole new level. Is there who's tried Periscope?
Is anyone using Periscope now to broadcast from here?
So if you don't know what Periscope is, basically you open it up and you can start a live video stream and you basically live broadcast in the same way, like a kind of technology that would be reserved for most news companies. But from your phone, live broadcast to thousands of people. I've watched. I've seen conversations with astronauts. I've watched live hockey games in places, in Canada. I've had conversations with famous venture capitalists, and I mean, it's incredible. People who are using it to basically just open it up and say hey, what's up? Who's out there? And then have that conversation.
Speaking of small kids, I have small kids too. And what I do is I use Periscope to sort of go to clubs at night when I'm actually sort of trying to put my kids to sleep. I'm using Periscope to sort of check out different bars in Stockholm where people are broadcasting and trying to feel young. And I recommend it. It's great. Yeah. All right. Thank you.